Welcome to all. I would like to make a very brief discussion on environmental hazards and disaster. We all know that the environmental hazards are an inevitable part of this nature. For example, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, winter storms, earthquakes, landslides, and other extreme events are natural phenomena that we cannot control. Some natural events can change the ecological environment. Consider this impact caused by natural hazards. For example, wildfires burn forest and grassland. Coastal storms erode beaches. Flooding inundates wetlands and marshes, and so on. Despite all the destruction caused by natural hazards, these occurrences are part of natural system. Hazards have been happening for billions of years on Earth. The natural environment is amazingly recuperative and resilient. After a hazard event, sometimes ecosystem can regenerate. Now we're coming to the two very important topic, the hazard and risk. Hazard is best viewed as the naturally occurring or human-induced process or event with the potential to create loss that is a general source of future danger. So it is a natural or man or human-induced phenomena that have a potential threat to human life or human creations, and risk is sometimes taken as synonymous with the hazard, but risk has some additional implication of the chance of a particular hazard actually occurring. It is the combination of three different dimensions, that is hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. Now, when we come to the topic of disaster, it is not synonymous with hazard. And according to the Stafford Act in the United States of America, any natural catastrophe, including hurricane, tornado, storm, high water, wind-driven water, tidal wave, tsunami, earthquake, and all these, or regardless of cause, any fire, flood, or explosion in any part of the United States, which in the determination of the precedent causes damage of sufficient severity and magnitude to warrant major disaster assistance under this act to supplement the efforts and available resources of states, local governments, and disaster relief organizations in alleviating the damage, loss, hardship, or suffering caused thereby. Now, the intersection of the human environment and natural hazard. You can see that there is a natural hazard, and this is the human environment. Now, the human environment, there are various dimensions. There may be the vulnerability, means their preparation, their preparedness, their resilience, their exposure to a particular natural hazard. And when this intersection occurs, means the human environment and natural hazard intersect in a large scale, then it is called a disaster. Now, there are obviously some differences in natural hazard and disaster. Natural hazards are elements of circumstances in the natural environment that have the potential to cause harm to people or property or both. As compared to natural hazards, disasters, which are caused by the natural forces or activities of human beings, are rarely or relatively sudden and cause large widespread death, loss of property, and disturbance to social life. Natural hazards may be swift or permanent aspect of the respective environment settings like currents in the ocean, steep slopes and unstable structural features in the Himalayas, or extreme climatic conditions in the desert or glaciated areas. Any event can be classed as disaster when the magnitude of the destruction and damage caused by it is very, very large, it is very, very high. Every disaster is unique in terms of the local socioeconomic factors that control it, the social response it generates, and the way each social group negotiate with it, means its preparedness, its resilience. So there are some important mentions regarding the environmental disasters. The natural environment changes continuously. The process of changes can be gradual, such as the evolution of landform, and sometimes it is catastrophic. Now, changes may be limited to areas such as hailstorm, means it is scale specific sometimes, tornadoes and landslides, or they may be affect large scale such as the ozone layer depletion, or it is the epidemic. Some environmental changes are desirable such as seasonal changes, means it is time dependent, time scale dependent. Some are undesirable changes such as earthquake and tsunamis. Now, disasters or natural disasters are changes that are always disliked by the humankind. Disaster is undesirable changes resulting from forces that are outside of human control, strike so quickly with little or no warning, which causes serious disruption to life and property of humankind. Now, there are some very common characteristics of human hazards. You know, the origin of the event is clear and produce some known threats to the human life or well-being. For example, a rainstorm produces flood that causes death by drowning. The warning time is generally short as the events are often rapid onset. Most of the direct losses, whether to life or property, are suffered shortly after the event, that is within days or weeks. You know, the human exposure, it is very important term, that is the exposure, how you are exposed to a particular hazard. The human exposure to hazard is largely involuntary, normally due to the location of the people in a hazardous area. The resulting disaster justifies an emergency response on the scale of international humanitarian aid. Now, we would like to discuss how hazard is translated to a disaster, hazard become disaster. You can see that there is a hazard. It may be earthquake, it may be flooding, it may be a landslide, and so on, or any drought condition. And there are some vulnerability conditions, there are some preparedness conditions. If we focus on the points, now this is limited access to power, structure, resource. That means it tells about your resilience, it tells about your preparedness for against a particular hazard to be occurring. Now, lack of local institutions, training, appropriate skills, local investment, local market, press freedom, ethical standards, lack of these means you are more prone to be affected by a hazard. There are some fragile physical environment, dangerous locations, unprotected buildings, fragile local economy, vulnerable society, public actions, and so on. Means your preparedness, your lack of preparedness force you to be more affected by a particular hazard, and when it is in a very large scale, then it is become a disaster. Now, I have tried to make different type of classes of the natural hazards. There are three major classes. First one is the natural hazard, technological hazards, and context hazard. Natural hazards means it may be geologic, it may be atmospheric, it may be hydrologic, or it may be biologic. Now, earthquake, volcanic eruptions, landslide, avalanches, all these are in the category of geological hazards. But when we tell about the atmospheric hazard, then we must say the tropical cyclone, mostly in the Bay of Bengal, the formation of the cyclones, deep cyclones, tornado, hail, ice and snow, and so etc. Hydrological hazards covers the river floods, coastal floods, drought condition, etc. And biological for epidemic, diseases, wildfires. We know all about the COVID situation. Now, technological hazards, transport accident. There are four different subcategories: transport accidents, industrial failure, unsafe public buildings and facilities, hazardous material. And in the section of context hazard, there are also four divisions: international air pollution, environmental degradation, land pressure, and some super context hazards. Now, these are some pictorial presentation of different type of natural hazards you can see, and all these things I have taken from the internet. You can easily find all these things, its descriptions in the internet. So I am very much thankful to the available resources in Google and in internet. I must acknowledge this. And now this is my last slide. There are the various dimensions and important terminologies that are engaged, that are accustomed with the very important when we discuss about the hazards, risk, environmental disaster, and etc. So thank you very much for your kind presence, and thank you so much